Welcome to Arsenal, where the weapons and war machines of military history come to life. Today, we explore the Apache attack helicopter in Desert Storm and the Cold War, and the crews and opponents who gave it its reputation. A longer version of this feature, with fact sheets and photos, is available in the print edition, on LinkedIn or by email. If you enjoy learning how technology, tactics, and human decisions come together in combat, you can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com.
The desert night is almost black, but inside the cockpit, the world glows green. A pair of Apache attack helicopters skims just above the sand over western Iraq, rotor discs beating cold January air. Ahead lies an Iraqi radar site feeding the country's air defense network, a node the coalition needs destroyed before the first strike aircraft arrive. The mission is simple to describe and unforgiving to execute. Stay low, find the target, kill it quickly, and leave before the defenses can react. Arsenal is the Friday feature of Dispatch, United States Military History magazine.
In the front seat, the co-pilot gunner slews the targeting sight toward faint lights on the horizon. The image sharpens into buildings, masts, and parked vehicles. Range data and Hellfire cues appear on the display, along with warnings that hint at nearby threats. In the rear seat, the pilot rides the terrain using night vision and navigation waypoints, keeping the helicopter low and steady so the gunner can work. Every small correction buys the formation one more moment unseen.
When the time comes, the Apaches rise just enough to see and shoot. Hellfire missiles drop from their rails and ignite, racing into the dark. For a few long seconds, crews trust the sights, guidance, and invisible beams carrying each weapon to its aim point. Flashes ripple across the radar site, followed by secondary explosions as fuel and ammunition cook off. The helicopters drop back to low level and turn away, already thinking about the next target and the long flight home.
That sequence captures the Apache's purpose. It was built to slip into defended airspace at low altitude, identify vital nodes or armored formations, and destroy them from standoff range. In Desert Storm, that meant opening a corridor for strike aircraft. The idea was older than the Gulf War, though. Behind those shots in the dark stood a Cold War fear: massed armor moving through Europe faster than NATO ground forces could stop it. During the 1970s, the United States Army looked across the inner German border and saw Warsaw Pact tank and mechanized formations designed to punch through NATO defenses with speed and weight. Ground anti-tank teams could be overrun, and fixed-wing aircraft might be limited by weather, terrain, and dense air defenses. The Army needed a way to kill tanks at long range, in large numbers, at night, and close enough to the ground fight to support maneuver. Earlier attack helicopters, such as the Vietnam-era Cobra, had proved that helicopters could fight, but they lacked the sensors, protection, and dedicated anti-armor firepower needed for a high-intensity European war. Air-land battle doctrine emphasized striking second-echelon forces before they reached the front line. That demanded an aircraft with weapons, navigation, fire control, and enough survivability to work low through valleys, forests, and broken terrain without exposing itself longer than necessary.
The new helicopter also had to survive the ordinary hardships of field service. It would need to operate from rough forward locations, endure weather, mud, dust, and cold, and remain maintainable by soldiers working close to the front. A weapon that was brilliant in testing but too fragile in the field would not solve the Army's problem. The Apache requirement, therefore, blended firepower, mobility, sensors, protection, and practical maintainability into one demanding package.
The Apache emerged from the Army's Advanced Attack Helicopter program in the mid-1970s. Hughes offered the AH-64, while Bell offered the AH-63. Test pilots and engineers compared agility, firepower, survivability, target acquisition, and the ability to hug terrain. From those trials came the Apache's basic shape: a low, angular fuselage, tandem crew, twin engines, stub wings for weapons, a high tail, and a nose packed with sensors. Refinement turned the prototype into a battlefield machine. Designers strengthened critical cockpit structure, improved the rotor system, added armor plate and self-sealing fuel systems, and integrated electronics that supported night attack. The Hellfire missile shaped much of the fire control system because the helicopter had to designate and engage armored targets from standoff range. At a glance, the AH-64 Apache was a twin-engine United States Army attack helicopter with a pilot in the rear, a co-pilot gunner in front, a 30mm cannon, guided anti-tank missiles, and unguided rockets.
Walk up to an Apache on the flight line, and it looks compact but heavily built, all angles and purpose. The stub wings hold missiles and rocket pods, while the sensor turret and cannon hang under the nose. The front cockpit wraps the co-pilot gunner in displays, switches, and hand grips for sights and weapons. The rear cockpit sits higher, giving the pilot better visibility over the nose and holding the primary flight controls and navigation systems. Between them runs the constant conversation of two people fighting one aircraft.
On a mission, the pilot's job is to put the helicopter exactly where it needs to be: low, masked by terrain, and positioned to shoot without lingering in danger. Hands and feet keep trimming the rotor, adjusting lift, and pointing the nose where the gunner needs it. The co-pilot gunner lives inside the sights, using helmet displays and stabilized optics to search miles of ground for silhouettes, heat signatures, and movement, while tracking friendly positions and radio calls. The systems around them turn the helicopter into a weapon. Engines drive the rotors, but also power generators, hydraulics, sensors, fire control computers, and stabilization gear. The 30mm cannon is slaved to the gunner's helmet, so a head movement can bring the barrel onto a target. Hellfires punch at armored vehicles, rockets cover softer targets or wider areas, and defensive systems listen for radar and missile threats, ready to trigger countermeasures and give the crew seconds to break contact. For crews, the Apache is both workplace and survival capsule. Armored seats, separated engines, crash-worthy structure, and protected fuel systems all improve the odds of coming home after damage. Yet veterans remember the strain: vibration through the airframe, dark cockpit workload, constant radio traffic, and the knowledge that one mistake in terrain masking can expose the entire formation. Training gives clean target lists. Combat brings partial information, conflicting calls, and fast choices at low altitude. That trust is intensely personal. The pilot and co-pilot gunner must think as a team, often with one person seeing the world through instruments, while the other feels the aircraft through controls. A small hesitation, missed call, or misunderstood cue can matter at low altitude. When the crew rhythm is right, the helicopter can appear, fire, disappear, and reposition with remarkable speed. When that rhythm breaks, the same cockpit can feel overloaded almost instantly. Those pressures became real just before dawn on 17 January 1991. Task Force Normandy, a joint formation of Apaches and Air Force Special Operations helicopters, crossed from Saudi Arabia into Iraq at low level through a moonless sky. Their mission was to destroy early warning radar sites in the opening minutes of Desert Storm. In concentrated minutes of fire, Apaches hit antennas, generators, and command vans with Hellfires, rockets, and cannon, creating a corridor for coalition aircraft heading toward Baghdad. The raid set the tone for the rest of the war. Nearly half of the United States Apache fleet deployed to the Gulf, and hundreds of helicopters flew combat before the brief ground campaign ended. Many missions happened at night, with crews hunting armor, artillery, and logistics columns. Official accounts credited Apaches with destroying hundreds of vehicles, including more than 200 tanks during the ground war.
Their ability to appear along a road march, kill the head and tail of a column, and then work through trapped vehicles made a deep impression.
The Apache's Gulf War reputation also depended on the people and systems behind the aircraft. Forward arming and refueling points kept helicopters supplied with fuel, rockets, cannon ammunition, and missiles. Maintenance crews fought sand, vibration, and long hours so crews could launch again. Intelligence staffs, air planners, and ground commanders identified where the aircraft could have the greatest effect. The visible strike was only the final step in a larger chain of preparation.
Combat also exposed friction that training smoothed over. Crews threaded heavy helicopters through sand haze, smoke, and ground fire while juggling navigation, sensor management, and communications. Maintenance teams learned which components tolerated desert dust and which did not. Commanders wrestled with how far to push deep attacks before helicopters became unsupported. Desert Storm proved that an attack helicopter could be a deep strike tool against modern defenses, but it also showed how narrow the margin could be when support, timing, or intelligence failed.
Ask Apache crews what they value most, and many start with sensors and weapons. Stable night vision, long-range optics, and precision-guided missiles let a small team find and hit armored vehicles, artillery, or entrenched positions from beyond small arms range. In the Gulf, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other deployments, Apaches served as roaming fire support, able to loiter behind terrain or over a ridgeline until ground troops called. Their presence could change an enemy's behavior before the first shot was fired.
Survivability reinforced that confidence. Armored crew compartments, redundant systems, ballistic-tolerant blades, crash-worthy landing gear, and protected fuel storage made the aircraft more forgiving than a light helicopter pressed into attack work. It was not invulnerable, but it was designed around the reality of hits, hard landings, and damage. For pilots and gunners, those choices mattered as much as the cannon or missiles, because firepower only mattered if the crew could survive long enough to use it. From the enemy's point of view, the Apache's strengths were unnerving. A formation that stayed low and used terrain could be hard to detect until missiles were already inbound. Iraqi crews during Desert Storm faced vehicles exploding in the dark with little warning beyond incoming fire and cannon bursts. Later opponents in Iraq and Afghanistan had to adapt to helicopters they could barely see but that might already be watching them from several kilometers away. The psychological effect became part of the weapon. Its weaknesses shaped doctrine too. If forced to climb, linger, or fly predictable routes over dense defenses, the large rotor disc and complex systems made the Apache vulnerable to heavy machine guns, anti-aircraft guns, and shoulder-fired missiles. In Iraq in 2003, a deep strike near Karbala left many Apaches damaged and one shot down. In Kosovo, threat concerns and basing delays kept Apaches from flying combat missions. These cases showed that the Apache works best as part of a combined system with scouts, artillery, electronic warfare, fixed-wing aircraft, and reliable intelligence. The Apache that flew in Desert Storm was the AH-64A, the original production model. As technology advanced, the Army chose deep upgrades rather than replacing the airframe outright. The AH-64D Apache Longbow added a digital cockpit and the distinctive radar dome above the rotor, allowing crews to detect, classify, and share targets while remaining masked behind terrain. Longbow upgrades also improved engines, navigation, and connectivity to the wider battlefield network. The newest major step is the AH-64E, often called the Guardian. It adds stronger engines, composite rotor blades, better communications, and systems that let the crew control unmanned aircraft from the cockpit. In practical terms, an Apache team can look over the next ridge using a drone instead of exposing its own rotor disc. By the mid-2020s, thousands of Apaches of various marks had been built or upgraded, even as armies debated how manned attack helicopters fit into a future filled with drones. Decades after its first flight,
The Apache remains a symbol of modern land warfare. It turns information and precision firepower into protection for troops on the ground. Its influence appears in night operations, deep attacks, and the expectation that aviation and ground maneuver should work as one system. In the United States, its record from Panama to Desert Storm, Afghanistan, and Iraq helped cement rotary wing firepower as a core part of how the Army fights.
You can see that legacy in museums and on flight lines. At Fort Novosel in Alabama, the United States Army Aviation Museum helps tell the story of Army helicopters, from early types to modern aircraft like the Apache. Other museums and base displays include Apaches or Allied variants beside earlier gunships. For dispatch and trackpads readers, the legacy also lives in photographs, video, living history interviews, and beyond the call stories featuring pilots, gunners, mechanics, and ground troops who depended on those dark silhouettes overhead. You can also hear narrated versions of Arsenal features as part of the Trackpads podcast feeds and dispatch audio editions.